This is a story about dignity, after life takes back what it once gave. Kevin Baker stood in the doorway of his workshop holding an envelope he hadn't opened yet. The light inside was still on, the tools laid out exactly where he'd left them, as if the day hadn't decided to change its mind. Just weeks ago, this room had felt different, lighter, safer. For the first time in decades, success had arrived without asking him to hurry. His name had been spoken with respect. His work had finally been seen, and now something in his chest felt off. Not panic, not fear, a quiet misalignment, like a board that looked straight until you stepped back. Kevin set the envelope down on the workbench and ran his hand across the surface, feeling every groove worn in by years of use. He had built his life the same way, slow, deliberate, trusting that careful work would hold. The phone call had come earlier that day. Short, polite, apologetic without warmth. Words like funding, restructuring, unexpected changes. No one raised their voice. No one blamed him. That almost made it worse. At 68, Kevin had learned that the loud moments weren't the ones that altered a life. It was the quiet ones, the pauses, the sentences that ended too neatly. He hadn't told Lori yet. She was inside the house, moving through her evening routines, unaware that the ground had already begun to shift. Luna watched from the window, tail still, eyes alert, sensing a change Kevin couldn't name. He thought of the years it had taken to arrive here, the patience, the faith, the relief of finally believing that staying had meant something. And then a smaller, more unsettling thought surfaced. If it could come this late, it could leave just as easily. Kevin turned off the workshop light and closed the door. For the first time since success had found him, he didn't know what waited on the other side. The loss didn't arrive all at once. It revealed itself the way rot does, slowly and then everywhere. The funding disappeared first. A letter followed. Then a phone call that lasted less than 5 minutes. The historic designation was postponed. The referrals stopped coming. The careful balance Kevin had just begun to trust tipped back into uncertainty. No one apologized twice. Kevin went back to his bench the next morning anyway. He sharpened his tools, swept the floor, began a small repair job he'd already promised to finish. His hands remembered what to do even as his mind lagged behind, trying to catch up with a reality that no longer fit the story he'd been telling himself. By the end of the week, the check he'd been expecting didn't arrive. He stared at the empty mailbox longer than necessary, then closed it gently, as if noise might make things worse. Inside, Lori watched him from the kitchen doorway. She didn't ask questions yet. She had learned over decades that Kevin needed silence before words. That night, he finally told her. She listened without interrupting. No sulk, no anger. Just a long breath when he finished. "We'll adjust," she said. Not bravely, honestly. Kevin nodded, but something inside him cracked anyway. What surprised him most wasn't the money. It was the way the loss rearranged his sense of himself. For the first time since the recognition had come, Kevin felt exposed. As if success had briefly given him a shape, and now that shape had been erased. In bed, the ceiling fan spun above him, steady and indifferent. The same fan, the same room, and yet everything felt unfamiliar. Was it ever real, or had I mistaken relief for permanence? He thought of the years he'd spent believing that if he stayed true long enough, life would eventually respond. It had, briefly, just long enough for him to notice what it felt like to be seen. And now it was gone. The doubt that followed was sharper than anything he'd felt before. Not about the loss, but about himself. If success could vanish so quietly, what exactly had all those years been building toward? Kevin turned onto his side, careful not to wake Lori, and stared into the dark. For the first time in a long while, faith felt heavier than work. The weeks that followed stripped things down to their essentials. Kevin began turning down work, not because he wanted to, but because the kind of work he'd been offered no longer matched who he thought he was supposed to be. Cheap jobs, rushed fixes, requests that asked him to forget the care that had defined him. Each refusal felt like cutting away a piece of himself. Without the projects that had briefly elevated him, the days grew longer. The workshop filled with unfinished ideas. Tools lay where he left them, waiting for hands that hesitated more than before. One afternoon, Johnny stopped by unannounced. He watched Kevin sand a board that didn't need sanding, the motion repetitive, almost offensive. "You okay?" Johnny asked. Kevin nodded too quickly. After his son left, the question lingered. If he wasn't the man whose work was finally recognized, if he wasn't the late success story, then who was he now? The loss had done something the years of obscurity never had. It had shaken his identity. Success, Kevin realized, hadn't just changed his circumstances. It had given him permission to believe the sacrifices meant something. And now that permission had been revoked. One evening, Kevin pulled the old ledger from a shelf. Decades of handwritten notes, measurements, costs, margins so thin they barely justified the ink. He traced a finger down the pages, stopping at jobs long finished, names long forgotten. Was this all there was? Had I mistaken endurance for purpose? The questions came without answers. But as he closed the ledger, another truth surfaced. Unwelcome, but undeniable. The loss hadn't taken his skill, hadn't taken his discipline, hadn't taken the care he brought into the world. It had only taken the reward. That realization didn't comfort him. Not yet, but it stayed. Like a splinter you can't ignore, painful, but real. And slowly, beneath the ache, something else began to form. Not hope, clarity. Clarity didn't announce itself. It settled in quietly, the way dust does after a room has been disturbed. Kevin stopped waiting for the feeling to pass. He stopped telling himself that once things returned to how they were, or how they had briefly been, he would feel whole again. That expectation loosened its grip, not all at once, but enough for him to breathe. He began taking the work that came without resentment. Not the rush jobs, not the careless ones, but the honest requests, small repairs, old cabinets, homes that needed patience more than speed. He charged fairly. He worked carefully. He finished what he started. No one applauded. That mattered less than he thought it would. One morning, Lori found him at the kitchen table, repairing a loose chair rung with the same care he used on commissioned pieces. "You don't have to do that today," she said. "I know," Kevin replied. "I want to." There was dignity in choosing the work when the reward was uncertain, in showing up without the promise of being seen, in refusing to let bitterness decide his posture. At a community center nearby, someone asked if he'd help mentor a few younger tradesmen who were struggling to find their footing. Kevin hesitated. Teaching had never been his ambition, but he said yes. The conversations were simple, about patience, about mistakes, about the difference between finishing a job and standing behind it. The younger men listened, not because Kevin had succeeded, but because he spoke without pretending the road had been kind. Johnny noticed the change. "You seem steadier," he said one evening. Kevin considered that. The word felt accurate. Not happier, not triumphant, steadier. The loss had taken something from him. That was undeniable, but in its place it had left a clearer understanding of what he refused to lose. His standards, his restraint, his faith in work done well, even when no one was watching. Life hadn't returned what it took, but it had revealed what couldn't be taken at all. On a quiet evening, Kevin locked the workshop earlier than usual. The tools were clean, the floor swept, the unfinished pieces waited without urgency. For the first time since everything had shifted, leaving them there didn't feel like abandonment. At home, Lori was reading by the window. Luna slept nearby, rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The house held the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. Kevin sat down, letting the day end without measuring what it had given back. He thought about the version of himself who had briefly tasted success and feared losing it. About how tightly he had held onto the idea that recognition would finally explain the years that came before. It hadn't. Losing it had. What remained was quieter than success, but stronger. The ability to choose dignity without reward. To work without needing proof that it mattered. To stay faithful to a way of living even when life withdrew its approval. The phone rang once. A neighbor asking for advice. Nothing urgent. Nothing profitable. Kevin listened, offered what he could, and hung up. That felt enough. Later, as the porch light cast its familiar glow, Kevin stood in the doorway and looked out at the street. The same one he'd walked down every morning for decades. Nothing about it had changed. He had, not because life finally rewarded him, but because it tested what he would be without the reward. Kevin turned off the light and went inside. What remained was his, and it was real.